Hello, and welcome to another edition of Joe and Kat Chats.
Absolutely.
This episode, we're going to be talking about reparations again, because last week we ran out of time. There was so much more we wanted to talk about, and we just didn't get to everything. So we made the decision to, we're just going to talk about reparations again. There's also been some newer things in the news this week, so yeah, we're going to get to it. How are you doing, Joe?
You know what, Catherine? I am good, and it's going to get better. I promise you. I'm good, and it's going to get better. It's one of those things. There's what you just said, where we kind of ran out of time. I'm reminded of a song by the SOS band called "The Finest." There's a line of the song where the lead singer says, "Time goes slow when you." No, it goes. Time goes slow when you're with me. Time goes fast when we're apart. It's something like that. And that's kind of how it is when we do these chats. It's like, well, damn, that just went really quick. And it's just like an hour is just gone. And what the hell just happened? And we talked about all this stuff. And it's like, what happened? Where did the 60 minutes go? And wait a minute, I wanted to talk about this and this and this, and we didn't talk about that. So that is why you and I made the executive decision to scrap the plans for the colonialism conversation and give everybody reparations part 2, because like you so eloquently said a couple of minutes ago, there's a lot that's happening right now in the universe. And it is our duty and responsibility to make sure that the masses know about what's going on.
Yeah, for sure. No, I appreciate that. And I did want to say, just that I appreciate how, we've moved platforms because we had to over the last few weeks. And we've sort of seen an evolving way that we're doing these Joe and Kat chats anyway. So it's kind of cool to just continue that evolution and
Absolutely.
just sort of decide last minute, because we just decided this yesterday,
Right.
that we just wanted to talk about reparations again. So hopefully everyone is happy with that decision, and we'll get to the rest of the topics next week.
Absolutely. And again, as we always say, if you like what we do, share it with your friends. If you don't like what we're doing, tell us. And we are always open to suggestions for future topics. So our direct message inboxes are both open. If you want to call me, I can give you my phone number. We can talk on the phone, WhatsApp, whatever. Doesn't make a difference. So if you have an idea or a conversation that you think we should be having that everybody else can benefit from, let us know. We'll do it. It's that easy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's kind of a cool thing about how we can use Instagram still in our chats, because we're not doing these live anymore. So if you do catch us live, please feel free to comment, and we'll have more of a discussion and be able to engage with our audience more. So we definitely want that if anyone
By
feels
the way,
compelled.
I just remembered the line. The line of the song goes, "Time flies when you're with me, go so slow whenever you're away." That's the line of the song. That's how it went. I'm like, wait a minute, it's not that. It's the other way around. But that kind of alludes to kind of how these chats are going. It's like, okay, well, hey, when we're doing our thing together, it's like, okay, damn, that was fast. But then the other 6 days and 23 hours when we're not doing this, it's just like, yo, come on, man. When the hell is Tuesday getting here?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I definitely look forward to these every week, and
Me too.
and it's nice to be able to have these conversations just between the two of us, but also be able to share them, because they're intellectually stimulating, and I think everybody needs that. We need challenges in our lives, and we need to be reminded of some of these things that we talk about.
Exactly.
And reparations is one of them.
Reparations is one of them. And you know what? To go kind of deep into what we talked about, we just want to make sure that for those that did not watch last week's episode, we want to give everybody a reminder of what reparations are. And I will bring up the same exact example that I brought up in last week's conversation. And my Uncle Ansel, what my Uncle Ansel said when I was a little boy, hey, Joe, if you mess up, fess up.
Mm-hmm.
That's what reparations are. Reparations are making amends. It's paying somebody some sort of compensation to someone who has been disenfranchised or wronged. Um, war reparations exist, but we're staying off of war reparations. Reparations, as I said last week, are a form of transitional justice. Transitional justice. Now, we talked about transitional justice last week, but just we want to make sure that we give everybody a framework of what we're talking about here this week. So then there's nobody that can't say, nobody comes after us and say, hey, Joe, hey, Kat, y'all didn't talk about this, man. How are you going to give me talking about reparations, but I don't know what they are? No excuses. Now, transitional justice are basically judicial and non-judicial measures that happened or implemented in order to redress legacies of human rights abuses and violations. Now, you mentioned last week the Truth and Rights Commission in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
That is an example of transitional justice. I mentioned certain legislative acts. One of those legislative acts we will discuss in depth later today, called HR 40, House Resolution 40.
Mm-hmm.
That is a legislative act. We have different resolutions. Those are transitional justice acts. And we have reparations programs. There are several cities around the United States that are beginning to look into executing reparations programs. There are several schools. We've discussed 3 of them last week. We discussed Georgetown University. We discussed Tennessee, I think it was Princeton Theological Seminary, and we discussed another seminary that has decided to have reparations. And kind of indulge me here for about another 45 seconds. In last week's conversation, I said, well, you know what? I think Wake Forest, with one of my alma maters, needs to look into what they did in terms of slavery and reparations, because there's no way that with all that money that came through tobacco and tobacco farming in that area, there's no way that enslaved people did not take a part in that school.
Yeah.
Well, there's some amazing information that I want to share about that specifically. It happened earlier this year. I was totally unaware of it.
Oh.
So we'll talk about that also.
Yeah, that sounds good. It's always good to bring new information to a discussion we've already had. That's great.
Yes.
I do also just want to mention that we did discuss last week the difference between restorative justice and now how it can be used or act as a catalyst for transitional justice. And that discussion was followed by the discussion that you just mentioned about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Canada.
Yes.
And so, yeah, I do encourage everyone to go to last week's episode 13, and take a listen to that, and then come back to this one, because there's a lot of cool stuff. We talked about a lot of stuff in last week's episode.
A whole lot of stuff. And this is exactly why we're doing a part 2. Exactly why we're doing part 2. Now, something else we want to reiterate from last week's episode before we try to dig into some other topics is we're talking about reparations, but most of the conversation focuses and centers on United States reparations. Because, you know, I don't mind saying this, the United States is a terrorist country. We've terrorized a lot of people, and the United States has not always made amends to those that United States has terrorized. But in certain instances, the United States has tried to make some sort of amends on a limited basis. So, for example, many Native Americans received reparations. For example, Native Alaskans received over 44 million acres of land and $1 billion in 1971. There's a group called the Klamaths. They're in Oregon. They received $81 million. The South Dakota Sioux received a bunch of money. The Sioux received about $12 million. The Chippewas of Wisconsin received about $31 million. The Ottawas of Michigan received about $30 million. But the largest reparations package that has been paid to a group of people that were disenfranchised or had human rights violations committed against them was the United States to Japanese Americans. And the United States paid Japanese Americans $1.6 billion, with a B, billion dollars for placing Japanese men, women, boys, and girls in internment camps. So part of the reason why we're doing this show about reparations is because if Japanese Americans can be put into internment camps for a few years, maybe a decade, and they received $1.6 billion, or approximately about $20,000 per person, how big is that check going to be for American descendants of enslaved people? How big is that check going to be for, exactly, how big is that check going to be for Africans who were colonized by European countries? How big is that check going to be for Caribbean people who were colonized by predominantly 4 European countries? How big is that check going to be if Japanese Americans can get $1.6 billion out of the United States?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of countries that need to borrow a phrase, have some come to Jesus meetings and really need to look inside of themselves and say, hey, you know what? We really did fuck over a whole lot of people and we need to do the right thing.
Yeah, and I think that it's pretty clear, given you just laying that out, like why it hasn't happened yet. I don't think that the powers that be, which tend to be white people, the richest people in the world are white men, and
Yes.
they don't want to give that up.
Nope.
So
Nope.
So these conversations have been squashed in political realms all over the world for decades, likely decades.
Yes.
Because slavery wasn't actually abolished all that long ago.
Right. In some cases, centuries.
In some cases, centuries, I would say yes, but few centuries, because like I say, like slavery was only abolished like 200 years ago-ish.
Exactly.
So.
Yeah. And you mentioned legislation. And one of the topics that we wanted to discuss today was HR 40.
Mm-hmm.
And HR 40 was presented by a lady named Sheila Jackson Lee. She is a member of the House of Representatives, I think from California, if I'm not mistaken.
I feel like
and she said, hey,
Texas.
Or Texas, one of those two. It's a big state. It's a big state.
Anyway.
It's Texas or California, I can't remember, but it's a really big state. It's not like she's from Vermont or something. It's Texas or California. You're right. I think it is Texas. You're exactly right.
I feel like I read that somewhere.
Yeah, and basically it was, you know what? We need to take a look into reparations proposals for African Americans. So HR 40 is the Commission to Study and Develop Reparation Proposals for African Americans Act. And I'm going to read to you verbatim what the long title of the act actually says. It says, an act to address the fundamental injustice, cruelty, brutality, and inhumanity of slavery in the United States and the 13 American colonies between 1619 and 1865, and to establish a commission to study and consider a national apology and proposal for reparations for the institution of slavery and its subsequent de jure and de facto racial and economic discrimination against African Americans, and the impact of these forces on living African Americans, to make recommendations to the Congress on appropriate remedies and for other purposes. So that is HR 40. It's basically, hey, you know what? Let's get some really smart people to figure out what we need to do. If you have a proposal that makes some reasonable sense, present it to us. We need to study this. I like the idea of what Representative Lee is offering here. Mm-hmm. It makes sense But I think this is just me talking about this, but I think we are long past trying to study proposals for reparations. We're past that point.
Yes. Thank you for saying that.
We're past that point.
Yeah.
Because for $29.95, you can go to don't go to Amazon, because we don't support that. You can save a whole lot of taxpayer money, Representative Lee and Cory Booker and everybody else, and read this. Read this book, From Here to Equality. Okay? And you can go to the back, you can go to chapter 6, where chapter 6 talks about, hey, here's how you set up plans to have reparations for American descendants of enslaved people. And here's how much money, based upon certain economic factors and formulas, that American descendants of enslaved people should be getting. You know, here, do we use compound interest rates? Do we use a flat rate payment? Do we use what General Sherman said back in 1865? Do we use the 40 acres and a mule standard, and then base the value of the land with interest from 1865 until present day 2020? Do we use that as the basis for reparations? Do we go after companies that insured slave ships? Do we go after banks that financed the building of slave ships and farm equipment? Do we go after universities? For example, University of North Carolina had slave labor. Princeton University, slave labor. My alma mater, Wake Forest University, acknowledged the president of the school, Dr. Nathan Hatch, said, yeah, you know what? We had slaves, and we are creating a program to figure out what to do about this. Yeah. So I'm not going to say HR 40 is a complete waste of time, but I will say it's not the most effective use of time and government resources. Because it's one thing to have all these proposals and have a bunch of people sitting around Washington, D.C. at Capitol Hill saying, hey, you know what? Yeah, Black people deserve reparations. We should really give Black people reparations. Oh, you know what? Hey, Black people should get paid for their labor because they didn't get paid. How many damn times are you going to consistently say that over and over again, but just in different ways?
Yeah.
How many times?
Totally agree.
It's time to fucking do something.
Yeah.
It's time to do something and set up actual programs that will shrink the wealth gap. Again, Representative Lee, Cory Booker, anybody else in Congress that actually gives a shit about giving American descendants of enslaved people reparations, read this book. And if you need consultants, there's plenty of really smart people that can help you with this. These two authors, Dr. Sandy Darity and Kirsten Mullen, they're really smart. They wrote the book on this. Yeah. Talk to them.
Yeah.
If you want to talk about trying to if you want to set up programs to get housing, equal housing, talk to this guy, Richard Rothstein. Read this book, The Color of Law. Because you know what? This guy wrote a really good book, and he's really smart, and he studied housing, and he studies economic policy at University of California at Berkeley. That's a really good school. So he knows what he's talking about. How about this? If you want to talk about banks, because the 4 institutions that every community should have is a school, a bank, a grocery store, school, bank, grocery store, and a hospital. Mm-hmm. How about this? The Color of Money, Black Banks and the Racial Wealth Gap by Professor Mercer Baradaran. Right? She studies economic policy. She's a lawyer. She's really smart. And this is an excellent book. So again, for everybody that wants to talk about HR 40, no. Sure, it's okay to talk about it, but you need action. You need action.
I totally agree. I think it's important to have recognition and representation from your government. Yes. But I totally agree with you that these commissions, they tend to take several years to do research.
Yes.
The people who pass them hire people or contract people that they like. It's incredibly biased.
Yes.
And they literally don't have to do anything with the results. which is something I talked about a lot last week. I went on a little bit of a rant
That's good.
about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Canada, because
Absolutely. I
that
remember it.
commission was completed, I think it took either 5 or 8 years
Hmm.
to complete, which is already a long time when women and children were being murdered en masse. Um, and then it was completed in 2015. Now it's 5 years later, and there's literally nothing being done. It's just a document online. So yeah, so I think there's absolute validity to saying this is like cool. I'm glad that you're trying to recognize it, but what
Right.
are you doing about it? We
What are
need
you doing about
action.
it? We need action.
Yeah.
Action.
And
And
this
go ahead.
these
What are you going to say?
I think these commissions are a way to just bide time and not actually have any responsibility taken by Congress or any other Senate, any of them.
Or any other legislative body. This goes for
Exactly.
Canada also, in
Yeah.
terms of not necessarily a House or a Senate, but a parliamentary system that Canada has.
Mm-hmm.
There's there's going to come a time when there will be a day of reckoning,
Yeah.
and you could only kick the proverbial can down the road for so long before you either get tired of kicking the can becomes completely disintegrated and demolished and destroyed because you can no longer kick it because you've been kicking it so long, or you eventually run out of road to kick the can down,
Mm-hmm.
and you eventually have to do something. You have to either shit or get off the pot. Okay,
Yeah.
you have to do something.
Yeah, for
Now,
sure.
the to kind of go back to what I was saying earlier about my school, with my old school, Wake Forest, they said, you know what? Yeah, we had slaves, and they decided to come up with a program called the Slavery, Race, and Memory Project. And I'm going to read about a paragraph of this or two. It's relatively short paragraphs. It says here, Wake Forest University, as a Southern institution founded decades before the Civil War, which is actually true, has a history bound up with slavery and its tragic legacies. Attempts to recover, understand, and reckon more fully with that complex past have accelerated in recent years and are collected in a many faceted slavery, race, and memory project. This effort extends across and beyond our Winston-Salem and original Wake Forest, North Carolina campuses and includes active membership in the university's Studying Slavery Consortium. Wake Forest University joined the University Studying Slavery Consortium to help us understand and acknowledge the role enslaved peoples had in building and growing our university. The Slavery, Race, and Memory Project will guide the research, preservation, and communication of an accurate depiction of the university's relationship to slavery and its implications across Wake Forest's history. Okay, Catherine, tell me what you think about that.
I have a few thoughts. Um, and it's going to be similar to what I just said. So, like, cool, you're recognizing that.
Yep.
Good for you. I'm glad that they put this statement out. I'm glad they said it out loud. I'm glad that they appear to be taking responsibility.
Yep.
But you know what this reminds me of is about 3 months ago when the Black Lives Matter movement had a resurgence, the revolution restarted,
Yes.
and all sorts of companies, all sorts of schools, all sorts of institutions all came out with statements
I agree.
that are going to supposedly address racial injustices. But the institution that I attended last, York University, I just don't, there's no way. Like I'm familiar enough with that university that I can speak to it, and you can probably speak to this school that you attended.
Yes.
But I just know that it's words without any action. And so it's frustrating to hear
Mm-hmm.
in the sense that I just know that they don't mean it. They're not doing anything to protect Black students. They're not doing anything to provide, things like tuition, or scholarships, or lower tuition, or all of the other things that could be part of a reparations plan. for an institution like a university.
Yep.
So it's really frustrating to hear those like beautifully eloquent words, but understand that they don't have any impact because they're not going to do anything about it. There's nothing in there that's going to make reparations a reality for the people that have suffered, or the people, the descendants of those people that are still suffering because of slavery.
Yeah. If you put lipstick on a pig, it's still a pig.
Yeah.
No matter how much you try to mask the pig, it's still a pig at its very core. No matter how many 3 and 4 and 5 syllable words you use in these sorts of soliloquies and press releases, there's nothing in that that said, oh, we're going to do this, 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 and this.
Yes.
Let me read you another one because we're on it today. These are the presidents, President Dr. Nathan Hatch, president of Wake Forest University. Now, it says here that they had something to at the Founders Day convocation, and talks about a couple of things. And in that, he said that he acknowledged Wake Forest University's participation in the institution of slavery. And he says he offered an apology for how this is what he says. He offered an apology for how Wake Forest benefited from the labor and sale of enslaved people. Quote, "It is important and overdue that on behalf of Wake Forest University, I unequivocally apologize for participating in and benefiting from the institution of slavery." And he continues on and says, "I apologize for the exploitation and use of enslaved people, both those known and unknown, who helped create and build this university through no choice of their own," Hatch said. Quote, "I apologize that our founders did not recognize and support the humanity and intrinsic value of those they enslaved. And I profoundly regret that subsequent generations of this university did not affirm the humanity of the enslaved individuals who made our existence possible. In closing, this is a journey we are on together. Today, we acknowledge where our path began. And today, we pledge to one another that we will not forget our history, nor will we let the humanity of any be forgotten as we move forward. We are committed together to live up to our highest ideals, lifting everyone to that standard as one Wake Forest." I wish I could screenshot your face right now. I swear to you.
Yeah, I feel like maybe I'm just grumpy today, but like, man, I'm tired of this shit.
I, if you saw my Instagram story today, and there's, when you do an Instagram story, the dashes get a little bit smaller the more stories you have. Yeah, mine are about 1 millimeter apart, so I had a lot to talk about. And
Fair.
I was angry walking around the lake today, and a lot of my frustration and anger and just aggression was focused on all the bullshit that's happening right now.
Mm-hmm.
And when you read that sort of statement, the way I read it, that sounds there's no tangibles. It's substanceless.
Mm-hmm.
It's popcorn. It's popcorn. It's popcorn. That's what that is. When quite honestly, what we need is soul food. We need food that would help heal our souls and fix who we are as human beings, not just Black people, but white people and all people. Yeah. And what Dr. Hatch gave us was popcorn.
It's hot air. Yeah.
It's hot air. That's what he gave us. Hot air with a little bit of salt thrown on it for flavor.
Yeah, it's also got
and some butter to smooth it over. Because you gotta have some butter to smooth
just
it out.
Trying. So it also falls into something that I actually have had to work on myself, which is universalist language, because I really just sometimes appreciate, the whole, we're all one, we're all human, all this stuff. But there's a time and a place where I appreciate that, and this is not it.
It's not one of those
This
times.
is not it.
It's not
There's a clear race issue in both of our countries.
Yes.
And I guess like a, a lackluster thumbs up for him for actually apologizing, which is something that many leaders don't actually do. Right. But it's lackluster. Like there's nothing else there. And it's so frustrating that these are just puff piece speeches. Like, cool, we're in this together. Like, no, you clearly aren't anything.
You're not. And the worst, the same people that come out and use universalist language when obvious inequalities exist are the same types of people that when there's a disaster that happens for whatever reason, they're the same type of people that use Facebook filters on their Facebook profiles. They're the same type of people that change over to the French flag or Egyptian flag or Lebanese flag as some way of woke activism or woke theatrics, as I said in an episode of our illustrious Joe and Cat Chat series. It's that speech that I just read, and the people that come out and use universalist language, but won't actually get off their asses and march in the street alongside Black people and people of color. It's substanceless. Again, it's popcorn. It's popcorn. It's ketchup and mustard. And you can't eat ketchup and mustard by itself. They're good, or they're good on the side, but you need more than just ketchup and mustard. And these speeches and what I've just read to you, it's condiments. That's all it is. It's salt and pepper.
Nothing.
It's nothing.
Yeah.
It's nothing.
Yeah, I actually just want to take a moment to get our listeners to maybe go back, because onto our Instagrams, I should say, go back to last Thursday, because we are going to be doing just a really quick IG live about the marches that we attended last weekend, or the weekend before last, I guess. And so just look out for those on our Instagram pages, or for that IG live. So we're going to be talking about actually showing up for marches in person. So stay tuned.
Exactly. Oh, and by the way, and if you don't know what exactly to do at a march or a protest, as usual, me and my sister Cat Wells have you covered. And you're probably like, well, Joe,
this is true.
what are you talking about? Y'all didn't talk about well, actually, we did talk about this. Episode 2 of the Joe and Cat Chat series is about protests. And what to do with a protest, and why we have protests, and the many different types of protests, like strikes and wildcat strikes and boycotts. We talked about all of this, okay? And if you're not sure how to show up for somebody, oh, guess what? We have another episode that we did about how to be an accountability partner, okay?
Yeah.
So look, stop fucking with us. We've got you covered.
Yeah, we do. Truly. Yeah, it's been a wild ride, and it's been such a pleasure to be able to create these Joe and Cat Chats with you, Joe, because
likewise.
I mean, we keep saying it, but it's because it's so true.
It's true. We're here for you. We are here for you. We've got you. We've got you.
Yeah, for sure. And please take a look at all of the previous episodes, because they are, named properly and aptly talking about those subjects.
Those exact subjects. So, look, for everybody that's at home right now, and there's a lot of you are home right now because, you lost your job, the pandemic, you don't know what you're going to do. Look, just jump on IG, and you can have a Joe and Cat Chat marathon.
It's true.
All right. There's what, 13 episodes, 14 of them. Just spend 14 hours just watching us. Just watch us for 14 hours. If you're gonna binge watch stuff like Law and Order SVU or Friends, which is a bullshit show, or Seinfeld, which is even more of a bullshit show. Cut that out. Binge watch us.
Yeah, just throw
Binge
it on.
watch us.
Even if you just listen to it like a podcast, that's fine too.
Binge watch us.
Yeah.
That's going to be our new motto. Binge watch us. That's what you should be doing. Just binge watch us. We're more valuable. Yeah, that's what we do out here. But look, I know reparations, there's a lot of different places right now. We talked about my former alma mater, Wake Forest, and kind of what they're trying to do for reparations, but it's really not a whole lot there. But there are cities around the United States that are actually trying to do stuff with regards to reparations. Kat, I know you wanted to talk about a couple of these cities, and there's one in particular that I desperately want to talk about because I have a strong affinity and affection for one of these cities that we want to talk about later on.
Okay. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Yeah, I think it's time we sort of shift gears into some of the more positive things and some of the things that people are actually doing.
Absolutely.
So I know that I wanted to mention Evanston, Illinois, which is outside of Chicago.
Yes, it's home of Northwestern University, one of the best schools in America, and it's about a 30-minute drive north. It's a gorgeous campus.
Yeah, so I wanted to mention it because they do have a plan coming into place to provide reparations to the American descendants of enslaved Africans.
Yes.
And they're actually going to be using the proceeds of cannabis sales to fund those reparations.
Brilliant.
So I found that really interesting because there's a lot of talk about billions and trillions of dollars having to go to these funds because that's what people deserve and what, there are several estimates out there. But the amount of money is a very large amount. But the cities and the states that have legalized cannabis are seeing very large revenue from tax revenue from the sale of cannabis. So I think that is a really great way to be able to pay reparations without anybody squawking, anybody who might be opposed for economic reasons, at least.
Yes, it's a good start. It's a good way to create a plan to deal with the reparations issue. It's a good start, but that can't be the be all and end all. No. But it is certainly a creative way to go about it. What I would have liked to have seen happen, and again, this is why when I have these protest signs here, one of them, marijuana legalization. With marijuana legalization, what should actually happen with marijuana legalization is a jobs program that's connected to releasing low-level offenders of drug offenses that were locked up for dealing and selling marijuana because of racial inequality as a result of the historical legacy of slavery.
Yeah, absolutely.
That should be part of a reparations plan. Yeah. Because I have a really fucking big problem with white people selling weed in a storefront and making millions off of it. But 20 years ago, black people were selling weed and they're spending 10 to 15 years behind bars. I have a problem with that. So if we're going to talk reparations, it needs to be transitional justice in terms of, we're going from this to this, but it also needs to be a form of restorative justice. You have to restore these people that were enslaved or the descendants of these enslaved people who are now in an economically disadvantageous position to restore them to where they would have been if the action were never committed. And that is what Dr. Sandy Darity in this book talks about as a framework of ARC: acknowledgement, resolution, closure.
Redress and closure.
Redress and closure. Yes, redress. I'm sorry. And he talks about atonement and restitution as the two types of redress.
Yeah.
Important.
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing that up. Absolutely something that that needs to be brought up at the same time as this, because yeah, we really need to examine the cannabis industry, given that there have been some sort of legalized places for recreational use, at least recently. And I absolutely agree with everything you just said. I am absolutely for prison abolition, which is a conversation for another time. But yeah, when we're talking about anything that has to do with cannabis, we are also talking about the people who are disproportionately incarcerated for drug use and like nonviolent drug crimes in general, which typically in the US, way higher for Black men.
Exactly.
And in Canada, it's way higher for Black and Indigenous men.
Yes, correct, because we cannot ignore nor forget our Indigenous brothers and sisters.
Yeah.
We cannot forget them. We cannot forget them. Evanston, Illinois, great program, great idea. I know recently Tulsa, Oklahoma, if we know anything about Tulsa, Oklahoma, we know about Black Wall Street and how Black Wall Street was demolished in the better part of a day or two by an angry white mob. One of these survivors of Black Wall Street, she's a 105-year-old woman whose name escapes me. She is part of a lawsuit basically saying, hey, you know what? You white folks damaged Wall Street. You damaged the, Greenwood Street and Archer Street and Pine Street in the historic Greenwood section of Tulsa, Oklahoma. And you didn't do anything to pay us back. We want our money. We want our money. As an aside, and I'm a music guy, obviously. There is a band out of Tulsa, Oklahoma called the Gap Band. Okay, they had a bunch of songs, Yearning for Your Love, Burn Rubber, great band. The word gap, G-A-P, it doesn't actually mean gap as in a space. It's actually an acronym standing for Greenwood, Archer, and Pine. Greenwood, Archer, and Pine are three of the streets in the historic Greenwood section of Tulsa, Oklahoma that were part of Black Wall Street. So when they named the band, because they are from the three brothers, the Wilson brothers who made up the Gap Band are from Tulsa, Oklahoma. When they decided to name the band, they decided to pay tribute to Black Wall Street and the area which they grew up in the naming of their band, the Gap Band. Gap standing for Greenwood, Archer, and Pine.
That's very cool. Yeah, just as a quick note, we did talk about Tulsa in a previous episode, so
we sure
I don't remember which one, but
it was in the wealth inequality episode.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, thank you.
Wow.
But yeah, basically, white people burned it down, and
Yes.
never. I mean, many Black people were murdered when they did that. It was a travesty. It was horrific. And this woman who is part of a lawsuit now is I read a quote earlier on an article saying that this woman remembers the piles of bodies on the street, and that's just an image that I'll never forget, because makes it real. It makes it really real, and it still is, and they've never acknowledged. They, in fact, used legislation in the state and in the city to systematically ignore what happened in Tulsa on Black Wall Street. So I encourage all of our listeners to look that up. The history is definitely worth knowing, because it is absolutely something that needs to be part of this reparations conversation.
Yes. I spent time in North Carolina, as you and the listeners probably already know. And about a month ago, I spent time in Durham, North Carolina, which is not too far from where I'm going to be eventually moving back to in about a week or so. And Durham, North Carolina had a street called Black Wall Street. I forget the name of the street itself, but there's an entire video on my Instagram feed about the Black Wall Street in Durham, North Carolina. I'd urge each of you to watch it, because there's a bank that was there on that street. I think it's called Purnell Street or Parnell Street. Um, it's called Merchants and Farmers Bank, and it was one of the first black banks in the United States. They also had an insurance company that was part of the banking institution. I would urge you all to watch that video. It's on my Instagram feed. It's on my IGTV. It's Black Wall Street, Durham, North Carolina. So another city in North Carolina that I absolutely adore is Asheville, North Carolina. And Asheville, North Carolina made news a few weeks back because they decided to go ahead and start up a reparations plan. They decided to, their city council unanimously approved a reparations bill. Now, I've read all 3 pages of the bill. It's somewhat piecemeal in terms of what they want to do for the, I think, approximately 13,000 Black residents of Asheville, North Carolina. But again, that is a start. It is a start. We're seeing more cities across the United States look into the legacy of slavery. Where I used to live in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, the new mayor of the city was asked about reparations. And I'm remembering kind of what she said. She said, you know what? Yeah, we need to look into this. We need to look into this. And again, the school that we spent about 10 or 15 minutes talking about, Wake Forest, is in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. So again, this sort of reckoning that is taking place on a national scale, it's happening. But I certainly think that the international ramifications of reparations are going to be a conversation that eventually needs to be had also.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Yeah. Yeah, we did actually mention briefly the CARICOM thing last week. I guess I
Yes,
don't know what to call it.
CARICOM.
Yeah.
CARICOM. Yeah, and I could explain that if you want me to. I'd be happy to go over it again if you want me to.
Yeah, maybe just do a really quick recap
Yeah.
of the
Yep.
countries involved and the 10-point plan that they are focusing on.
No problem. CARICOM, it's an acronym for, it's Caribbean Community, and it's 15 nations and territories in the Caribbean that are together for economic cooperation. They're together. It's not, quite honestly, it's somewhat similar to what you would see in the African Union or what you would see in the European Union. Okay? Now, CARICOM was founded in Trinidad. It's now headquartered in Guyana. And if you look at the website, CARICOMreparations.org, there is a 10-point plan for reparations. Now, what these 15 countries and territories want to do is focus on pursuing reparations through European governance that primarily colonized countries in the Caribbean. And these 4 countries were mostly the UK, Spain, the Netherlands, and France. Not a whole lot of French, but definitely a whole lot of the UK and quite a bit of the Netherlands. Not really much Spanish, but UK and the Dutch, yeah, they colonized a whole lot of Caribbean people, a whole lot of Caribbean people. Now, the 10-point plan, I'm going to read this to you because I wrote this stuff down because I like writing stuff down. It says there's a full formal apology, repatriation, an indigenous peoples development program, cultural institutions, which I thoroughly agree with, because these cultural institutions are not only to preserve the culture of the people from each individual island, because each individual island has their own culture, and you don't want each individual island's culture to be homogenized through colonization, or essentially whitewashed because of colonization. Mm-hmm. But it's also making sure that these cultural institutions are reminders of what happened in years past. So there can be an actual process of atonement. Public health, illiteracy eradication, African knowledge program, psychological rehabilitation, technology transfer, and debt cancellation. Those are the 10 points. That's a part of the 10-point plan that began in 2013 with CARICOM. Again, circling back to HR 40 and Sheila Jackson Lee's proposal in the House of Representatives, they could have looked at CARICOM's 10-point plan and be like, yeah, you know what? this is a good idea. This is a really good idea, because let's take, for example, cultural institutions and reminders of what happened in this country. What you have right now are reminders of slave owners and racists in the form of statues to remind everybody that, yay, guess what? White folks, we used to own you black folks. But there's not really a whole lot of reminders going the other direction as, hey, you know what? Black people used to be enslaved, but we're no longer enslaved, and we are treated just as equally as our white counterparts. And I said this in a conversation with my friend Akeem months ago. I said, if our Jewish brothers and sisters can constantly remind us of the Holocaust and the human rights violations and atrocities that took place during World War II, then Black people, American descendants of enslaved people, should be afforded that same right and privilege to do the same. They should be allowed to do the same.
Absolutely.
For every Holocaust museum that you see in any city around the United States and Canada and anywhere else, there should be an American Descendants of Enslaved Peoples Museum, reminding people in America of the same sorts of atrocities and human rights violations that Black people suffered at the hands of white people, no different than what Jewish people had to deal with at the hands of Germans and Austrians.
Yeah, and people should be taught the true history.
Absolutely.
Not just a very whitewashed version. Because I
Don't
didn't learn about
sanitize it.
Yeah, it's it's yeah, I agree. Like I had to learn about a lot of this stuff on my own when I was much older than I should have been. Like in university, I learned about residential schools in Canada, which is something that is absolutely something I should have learned as a child, because the last one closed in the province that I lived in 1995 when I was a child. So like, why didn't I learn about that?
Don't know what to tell you.
Yeah. Anyway, that's another conversation that we have discussed before is schools. So
oh, that's right. And we had schools as part of the Joe and Kat Chat series. Again, listeners, viewers, binge watch us.
Yes, exactly.
Binge watch us, please.
Yeah. Go back and listen to all of our ramblings, because it is just interesting, and I enjoy them as well. So we've only got 5 minutes left. So I just wanted to touch on like what reparations can look like, because I think a lot of times people think it's just cash, like money paid to American descendants of enslaved Africans.
Yes.
And Canadian descendants too.
Absolutely.
We absolutely had slavery in Canada.
Sure did. Underground Railroad ended in Canada.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, the Underground Railroad is sort of touted as this, like, we're the white saviors of North America, but really we had slavery for so long before that, and once Black people arrived through the Underground Railroad, many of them also left again because the conditions were so horrible.
Plus it was cold.
Oh yeah, it sucks. It sucks in the winter. Please look up the history of Black people and slavery and all the things in Nova Scotia if you want to learn about the Canadian.
Especially Africaville or Africville?
Africville, yeah.
Africville, yes. Absolutely.
That's a really interesting and tragic part of our history.
Absolutely.
That's worth knowing. So
it's worth knowing. Yeah.
But yeah, so I think that just in this conversation, I think it's important that we highlight that, educational opportunity, like scholarships, like forgiving student loans, like making tuition lower for the people who deserve reparations, land titles to build wealth and equity.
I agree
That's
with that.
a major one, which goes back to a conversation we also have been, bringing up often is where the sort of 40 acres and a mule promise went, because it just disappeared. Representation in, you know, political and academic realms, all of this is just like so important, I think, to what reparations could look like, as well as cash payments. Like this is not to exempt cash payments. I just know that there's a lot of people that will be resistant to cash payments. So I just wanted to kind of highlight that. And then the other thing is I really want to emphasize community in this conversation too, because community investment and community resources are a huge thing that we need to be aware of, you know, including in these proposals, because just like when we talk about defunding the police, like the community is keeping itself safe from police and from quote unquote crime. So that's needs to be emphasized in my view, no matter where or how or what this reparations conversation is going or whatever.
It's cash, adopting some or maybe all of the measures of CARICOM's 10-point reparations plan, speaking to consultants and really smart people that know what the hell they're talking about with regards to reparations, like a Sandy Darity, like a Richard Rothstein, like Mercer Baradaran, like Yvette Carnell, like Dr. Boyce Watkins, like Dr. Claude Anderson, who's written 5 excellent books, and he's the head of the Powernomics Institute in Upper Marlboro, Maryland. Talk to that gentleman. Talk to Derek Hamilton. Talk to Thomas Shapiro. Talk to attorney Antonio Moore, who has a YouTube channel called Tone Talks. There's a lot of really smart people out here. Talk to Dr. Ira Katz Nelson, who's written one of the greatest books in terms of racial justice and equality called When Affirmative Action Was White. Talk to him. There's a lot of really smart people. Talk to Julianne Malveaux, who has a PhD in economics from MIT. Talk to her. There's really, talk to Angela Davis.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right?
I couldn't agree more.
Talk to Angela Davis. Here's who you don't talk to. You don't talk to people like Kamala Harris. Okay? You don't talk to people like Barack Obama. Okay? You don't talk to every single Black celebrity that thinks they have an idea of what they want to do that's best for the Black community, but never actually studied or read a book about any of this stuff. You don't talk to those people. They might be good front men and women for trying to push the idea to the masses, but they should not be the point people for the sort of granularity of data and information that is necessary to provide a comprehensive plan for reparations.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that too. Talk to people who have studied this stuff and know their shit, because those people are studying this stuff for most of their lives or most of their careers, and that's like, you know, if they don't know, then who will, you know?
Who will?
Yeah,
exactly. And that was the alarm.
That was the alarm. We have to wrap it up, Joe. Thank you so much for this incredible conversation. It's just been a pleasure once again. It's been funny that we're sort of telling everybody to go and rewatch all of our Joe and Kat chats, but really it's because we do talk about these issues more in depth in many of the other episodes. So we do encourage you to go and look into them more in depth.
Right. You know, if you're going to binge watch something over the Labor Day holiday weekend, okay, fire up the barbecue, you know, get your muffins, you know, get your cup of tea, drink whatever adult beverage you want to drink, binge watch us. We're here and we're here for you. And as always, if you reach out, we reach back, and we do this because we care.
Absolutely. And I'll just say really quickly that I've been drinking out of a Harry Potter mug this whole time, and I do believe that trans women are women, so F that lady.
Excellent. Well
All
done.
Right.
Well done and well said.
Take care, my friend. We'll see you next week
Yes,
on another episode. Bye.
Word. Bye-bye.